Welcome to another episode of the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lisa Farr, and it is just me for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed our first series of 2022 with a guest, the episodes with Gibby. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you'll support her business as well. And if you are thinking of buying Gibby jugs, you will buy the real deal from her websites and not a counterfeit. I hope that you got some real insight into releasing an innovative product, and I hope she inspired you to consider doing the same thing if you have an idea. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the supply chain, and 2022 is not easing up on us. So we are going to take a look at what is happening right now. Let's do it. This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. So following on from 2021, the supply chain broke hard, and in 2022, we are continuing to see those things happen. Not only are we continuing to see heavy pressure being put on supply chains, we are starting to see that, well, not starting, it's becoming more than apparent that the issues that flow on from inflation are not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, they're going to continue, and they are continuing. And what we may end up seeing is issues with currency starting to play into this issue as well. Now, the current situation with the supply chain is that freight companies are not going to put their prices down. They're exorbitant. They continue to be exorbitant. And the cost of moving goods around is going to continue to become a problem, at least for the foreseeable future. We are in a challenging time around supply and demand economics. And all of these things are interlinked, because if the demand for something goes up and supply is constrained, whether it's because we can't produce the goods or we can't get the goods shipped to somebody, the result is inflation. So because there's a higher demand for something, people will be more prepared to pay extra to get their hands on it. We have seen that there have been some challenging issues in the supply chain for coffee. There's been a shortage in 2021. We're expecting that shortage to show through in 2022, and the supply chain constraints, the logistical supply chain constraints are proving to become a problem still. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to not only drive up the price of coffee, but it's going to make the availability of it rather interesting. Why? Because the countries that will pay, the countries that are prepared to pay, are where importers are going to divert the majority of their supply. So if a particular currency around the world seems to drop, and if an industry in the local area or in a country seems to be struggling, producers are going to have to think long term. Importers are going to have to think long term. And if supply to a particular country is experiencing more challenges than other countries, those are going to factor into where supply is diverted. And obviously this is not just for coffee, but the reason that I'm particularly focusing on coffee, other than the obvious, that's the industry that we're in, is because it's a raw material that has a shelf life. It's a raw material that doesn't age well in most cases. Now, something else to consider here is the competitiveness of access to this raw material. So people's ability to pay may continue to factor in, well, most certainly will continue to factor in to the fact that people, who people will supply. There's no nicer way to say this than to just say the bigger fish that are willing to pay, that can guarantee not just a one-off purchase, but continued good business, that's who people will sell to. And so I'm looking at the bigger corporations that will buy up a producer's whole yield and will take care of the logistics because it's already built into their infrastructure. So big corporations, they already have this logistics nailed down. The issue herein lies. I am hearing stories whereby different smaller to medium businesses are trying to game this system. So in previous episodes earlier this month, what we were talking about was that there are going to be, there's kind of a natural reckoning that's happening in the industry whereby businesses who had over-leveraged, people who had borrowed too much money, or people who hadn't priced their products properly enough. So they were surviving month to month and they had somehow managed to survive this long into the pandemic. What we are starting to see is that other, perhaps new players, from what I'm seeing, a lot of them are new players, are coming into the industry and they've got new money. And what they're saying is, well, I'm going to pay extra for my product and I'm going to underprice everything. And I'm going to do that for the next 2 years. And I'm going to give free equipment with that. Now, I have a runway of being able to do that for 2 years. I can do it for 2022 and 2023. By that point, I should have wiped out most of my competition, which has been trying to survive for 2020 and 2021. And the business backs are about to get broken. So what's happening is you've got new money coming into the industry that is trying to undercut legacy businesses, smaller businesses, who are really struggling under 2 years of constant stress from the supply chain. Now, this is a factor that a lot of small businesses are going to have to, particularly roasters, are going to have to think about. Cafes also, because what we're starting to see is that the responsible pricing practices that we've been encouraging for quite some time is getting met by bad actors that are coming in and just saying, I've just got to survive 2 years. If I can survive 2 years, I'll wipe out everybody else. I'll just sell coffee cheaper to customers and let's see what happens. So they believe they've got solid business plans and they've got bottomless pits of money apparently. And I'm seeing this happen in quite a few regions around the world. Now, if this is something that you're experiencing and you think is a problem, let me know if you want me to talk about how to deal with this in a future episode. And if you're in our Patreon, we should have a conversation about this in the think tank, because this is a practice that has happened for eons in the coffee industry. We see it here in Australia every year. I see it in Sydney all the time. A new roaster comes in and thinks, I'm going to make a play. I'm going to undercut everybody. I'll borrow a ton of money and wipe everybody out. And of course, they take out a good chunk of the business and then somebody comes in and does the same thing to them. So this is going to get hairy over the next 24 months, I believe. That's I'm looking at it from a 2022 to 2023 time frame, that this is the runway they've given themselves. And look, right now, interest rates are still very, very low. Money's cheap. People are taking the opportunity before interest rates rise to start looking at how they're going to take advantage of cheap money. And this is just one of those ways. So the issues with the supply chain, people are trying to figure out how to game that system. And the issues that we were having last year, there's nothing new on that. It's the same thing repeated again and again and again. Ships aren't getting, like, there's too many ships off the ports. There's not enough room on ships to put a container. Shipping is ridiculously expensive and there's massive delays. So there's shortages everywhere. Please remember your pricing. Please make sure that you understand your numbers and get your head around it. We're always here to help if you need it through our consulting services, or if you're in the Patreon, we can go through it there. If you are in the roasted coffee tier, it's going to be one of the free live workshops that we do this year. We'll focus a lot on responsible pricing and how to understand that. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.